Hi everybody, it's Wendy from Ask the Landlady, and I'm here with all the tips and tricks to help you make a profit in real estate properties. So today's question is, what if my tenant moves in a long-term guest without permission? It's inevitable. Somebody, if you own properties enough time over time, somebody's going to try to sneak another occupant in, or two or three, or a whole nother family, because they fear that you're not going to accept them, you're not going to allow them, they might not be able to pass a background check that you're going to require. So this is going to happen more often than you would like it to happen. And when you find out about the non-sanctioned guest, most likely your tenant's going to say that they are just visiting, okay? In general, short-term guests are going to stay less than 2 weeks, right? Anything over that, I would be considering they are moved in. They are living in your unit. So you want to make sure you have a lease clause out there that specifies how you handle guests at your properties. And you can specify how long that guest should stay, how many times they can visit a year. This is your property. You can put those things there in place, because if they end up coming in for a visit and never leaving, then you have a new tenant occupant on your hands. And say your person with the lease takes off, you may end up with that person as a squatter and they have no lease obligations with you. So things you want to look for here is if somebody actually has their own key to the property, right? And they're letting themselves in and out, or they're getting mail there. Those are things where they have basically moved in. So first things first, let's clarify and let's make sure that your lease clearly states the current occupants, okay? So when I do a lease with somebody, we list all the names of the people who have passed the background check and are on the lease. And pay attention to kids, because as soon as they turn 18, that person becomes an adult and should go through your background check process and be added to the lease, okay? Those are all things you want to think about in advance. We clearly have those names stated. And then the clause saying anyone else on there is not an occupant there. And then you want to have an addendum if somebody does want to add another occupant, because things are going to happen. People are going to get married, and of course they want their person to move in with them. Or maybe a kid goes off to college and decides to move back home with their parents for a year to get themselves together. These things are going to happen all the time. What you want to do is have a policy where you have a background check. They have to pay the fee, do the background check. That way you make sure you're not moving in a criminal, somebody who's had a felony, somebody who's a sex offender. So you can make sure that all that is in place before you put them in there. You add them to the lease, and you will probably do a lease modification fee, because this takes time. Your time is worth money. So I'm always at the end of the day going to say, make sure you have this all spelled out in your lease, that there will be a fee charged, and that there is a clear process for them to be able to legally add an occupant to the lease. You get the final say as the owner as to whether or not they can pass a background check, whether or not the unit's big enough to take in another family, and whether or not it requires higher rent. If you have utilities included, absolutely, you can say, sure, you can move in, your son can come back home, but the rent is now going to be this price, to take into account that there's going to be more wear and tear and there's a higher utility cost. So those are all things that you want to think about before you add that visitor or new occupant to your list. Since that you will now have all these clauses in your lease, then you can, if you find out through the grapevine usually, or you see somebody living at the property, you have grounds for an eviction. You have grounds to ask that person to leave, because it is a clear lease violation. Their name, not on the lease, they're there all the time, they have moved in. You can go to that person and say, they either need to move on, or this is a clear lease violation and you are going to be asked to leave if you don't correct it, or you don't go through my process of possibly allowing this person to become a legal, viable occupant in the property. So there you have it. That's how you should handle these unasked for, uninvited guests that try to turn into permanent occupants in your home. If you want more information about all this, you can always go over to Amazon or my webpage, askthelandlady.com, and get my book. I've put a lot more information in there about all these types of lease violations and clauses and things that you need to be thinking about in advance. That way you're not taken unawares and you have a process in place to handle it. So have you had an uninvited occupant in your apartments? I'd love to hear about it. Shoot me a comment, because we're all in this together. It's not easy being a landlady and a landlord, is it? So let's all work together. Thank you, and I hope you learned something, and you have a great day.